Today, John Aravosis joins me. We're going to be speaking about the American election, which is coming up in less than a week's time, and of course, the war in Ukraine. So, John, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
We're going to be talking about... Well, it is going to be a fun week because, of course, the election is in November the 5th. So could you go ahead then, before we talk about policies and the two people that are running to be the next president, could you talk to us about the whole process of the election?
Oh, God. You mean how it works?
Yes, how it works.
Okay, it's a little confusing. The short answer is it's kind of like the game of Risk. You do not win the election by winning the national vote. Hillary Clinton beat Donald Trump by 3 million votes. She still lost. Al Gore, the Democrat, Bill Clinton's vice president, beat George Bush by 500,000 votes. He lost. The way you win in America is you have to win individual states. Each state has a point value. That's why I say it's like Risk. You know, the bigger countries on Risk have more points. The smaller countries have less. Washington, D.C., 3 points. California, 54 points, because it's big, a big population, I should say. If you win enough states to reach 270 points, you become president. Again, it's a ridiculous system, but it makes it so that candidates have to go state by state, and you'll hear them talk about battleground states, for example, or swing states. These are the states that are the most important ones because both candidates need it in order to reach that 270. So, I mean, that's pretty much it. And that's why you will also hear a lot of people talking in America about the individual state polling and everything else, because it doesn't matter nationally if you win, if you lose the states.
Of course, so the election's on November the 5th, right? And that's in less than a week's time, where everyone goes to the polls. However, there is early voting, so people have already started to vote. And as I said to you before, the inauguration's on January the 20th or the 21st, depending if it's on a Sunday. So what happens between the 2 months that's in between these dates, where who is actually the president? What's going on in the country?
The sitting president is still president until January 20th. So that's not an issue. The issue becomes, last time Donald Trump tried to violently overthrow the government and basically stop the new president from being seated. That gets complicated because had he achieved that on January 20th, Trump would have stopped being president because the Constitution, that's it. Your term ends, or I didn't even know this about Sunday. That's funny you said January 21st, but we always say January 20th. On January 20th, the current president's gone. At noon on January 20th, he's gone. If they haven't picked a new one by then, the Congress certifying the vote, nobody's president at that point. It's kind of a mess. And nobody's vice president either. I mean, it's an absolute mess. And that's what Trump was hoping for last time.
There is a few more people running to be president. Obviously, it's Trump, Kamala, and you've got the vice president nominees as well. However, for me, there's also a third one as well that you probably don't really like, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who's obviously now sided with Trump, and he wants to kind of make America healthy again, as he says. He wants to bring, he was criticizing Donald Trump for being in a McDonald's, and he wants to use tallow fat and all this nonsense. However, as you said before, that with the seats that you've got to win and the numbers with the states, he said that basically if it's kind of a tie, he'll get to be president if it goes through Congress. So how would that work? And is that a crazy idea?
I mean, yes, he's crazy, first of all. I mean, he's literally crazy. This is the guy who believes that no vaccines are literally said on CNN last year. There isn't a single vaccine ever proven effective, and there isn't a single vaccine ever proven safe. I mean, his organization, he set up this, child health organization. It's all about taking vaccines away from kids. They said a few months ago that the polio vaccine doesn't actually work. It hasn't helped anybody over all the last 70 years that it's been in existence. Polio isn't real. Your body has toxins in it, and the toxins give you polio. It's not really the polio virus. He's crazy. I mean, literally, unfortunately, he's a fringe conspiracy lunatic. The irony is, super environmentalist. His claim to fame is that he's an environmentalist. So what does he do? He endorses Donald Trump, who has every step of the way wanted to gut the environment. That's my problem with RFK Jr. I think he's lost his mind, but also he's just kind of a nut job, even if he weren't crazy. So in any case, this is very confusing. I am probably not the guy to ask, but if the election, for example, on January 6th, had they done what they wanted to last time when Trump tried to violently storm the Congress, January 6th is when Congress certifies the vote. Okay. Something like December 15th, all the states have to send the vote record to Washington to be certified. January 6th, Congress gets together. They go through all the states and they say, yes, Arizona's election was correct. Minnesota's election was correct. They certify the winner. And then 2 weeks later, or whatever, that winner becomes president. Trump wanted to stop that. Had he stopped that, what actually would have happened as we approached January 20th was then the election gets thrown to the Congress. And as I recall, I've got to remember this exactly. You probably know better than I do. The House of Representatives would decide, I believe, the president, and the Senate would decide the vice president. But it gets even worse than that. In the Senate, it's just a vote. The majority votes, blah, blah, blah. Now, one problem is it's the new, depending when the vote takes place, it's either the old Congress or the new Congress. And that I don't recall. I don't know. Do you? Because you seem to be sort of the savant on all this stuff.
I definitely don't know. It's very confusing over in America, I have to admit.
Because we have congressional elections happening right now. So if it's the sitting Congress, that's one thing. If it's the new people elected in November, it's another. So you got the Senate, where it's 100 senators, majority rules. So they would vote 51 votes, you pick the vice president. In the House of Representatives, it's crazy. They vote by delegation. House of Representatives is 435 members. It's based on 50 states. So the larger states have more members, the smaller states have fewer. Like Washington, D.C. isn't a state, but we get one person who isn't very powerful. California, like I said, I don't even know how many California gets. A lot. It gets thrown to the House. And rather than just having a simple vote in the House of the majority, which Democrats might win, each delegation gets a vote, meaning each state gets a vote. So California, and I'd have to ask Alexa right now how many members of Congress, but let's say they've got 20. I don't know. Those 20 members of Congress get together and vote, and the majority wins. So if California, for example, has 11 Republicans and 10 Democrats, California would go Republican. So it's not each individual member voting, it's each state voting, which screws things up entirely. For example, I know last time around, 2020, when we were worrying about it, Democrats had the majority in the House, but we believe we would have lost the vote had it been thrown to the House because of the weird state-based voting. Our system is insane. I mean, it really is. Frankly, it still confuses me. It goes back to slavery. It goes back to all these compromises with the southern states, the small states versus the big states. It's just this, and honestly, it's rather undemocratic because we should just vote and the majority wins would seem to be obvious, but oh well.
Well, of course, foreign policy is playing a really big part in this election. It could be consequential if whoever loses or whoever wins this election. Donald Trump versus Kamala. Let's start with Donald Trump because he is really keen on this. He obviously supposedly wants to end the wars in Ukraine and beyond, which is quite hard for him to do. As you said before, it would be very hard for him to stop the wars, as he said, before he gets inaugurated because he has no presidential power until that day.
Right.
But we obviously know his hatred towards China and things like that. So could you just touch upon Donald Trump and his foreign policy, and is it correct?
I mean, I don't think Donald Trump has a foreign policy. Donald Trump, and I really mean that. It's funny. I did an interview with the BBC the night Trump was elected in 2016, BBC Radio. They, were like an hour and a half late. I was living in New York. So like, instead of it being a midnight interview, it was like 1:30 in the morning. And I was just kind of like, all right, whatever. Get on the interview. They have me on for 5 minutes and literally cut me off and just said, okay, thanks. And they continued with this American professor because I was telling them Donald Trump is going to be a disaster. What is this really going to be? Is it really going to be that bad? And I said, yeah, but take the guy at his word. It's going to be a disaster. And the American professor going, oh, John, don't over exaggerate. And this kind of crap. After 5 minutes, they cut me off. And to this day, I'm like, you frickin' BBC morons. I was right. But I will never remember. They kept me up literally late at night and kind of were like, oh, poo-poo. Donald Trump doesn't have a foreign policy. Donald Trump is not just transactional. It is all about Donald Trump. It is about his personal interest, whether he is gaining or being hurt personally, in terms of money he's getting, in terms of threats he's getting or blackmail, right? Donald Trump's foreign policy is 100% based on what Donald Trump gets out of it. Okay. We know, for example, that Trump basically forced foreign leaders to stay at his hotels when they would come to Washington or go to Florida, where his little estate is. He would make sure that the events were at his Mar-a-Lago resort in Florida. So the Japanese prime minister had to stay at Mar-a-Lago and literally pay. Again, Trump is hosting them. Pay Trump to stay there. The Secret Service had to pay to stay at Trump's resorts. It was, again, everything with him was transactional, right? Russia, Trump's own director of national intelligence, Coates, who's a real ass. I never know how much I can swear on these things. Horrible human being. Religious right. he was a religious right leader. He was tied to one of the biggest religious right groups in America, Family Research Council, horrifically anti-gay. I mean, just hard for me to tell you enough how horrible right-wing this guy is. He said that he was convinced Donald Trump was compromised and being blackmailed by the Russians. He said he even had them invest. This is Donald Trump's head of intelligence at the White House, okay, who's a crazy right-winger. He was convinced Trump was being compromised and blackmailed by Putin. He even had them investigate behind his back, couldn't find anything. And to this day, he still says, I am convinced he was compromised in some way. That's the negative, like I said, where Trump, if you've got something on him, then he's going to do something for you. If he promises you, if you bribe him or whatever, he'll do something. Does Putin have something on Trump, or is Putin promising Trump a Moscow hotel that Trump has always wanted, right? You don't know. Trump with North Korea. Trump constantly talks about North Korea because he loves Kim in North Korea. Worst dictatorship on the planet. And I always sort of tell folks on my show that I do on YouTube and TikTok, North Korea isn't just the worst dictatorship on the planet. It's a horrific dictatorship. Like, it's one thing to be the worst, but maybe you're still not so bad. Horrific dictatorship. No one's allowed to leave the country. Millions starving. I mean, police state like out of 1984, the book. Horrific. And Trump is constantly talking about how, oh, they've got great beachfront property in North Korea. I've told him we should be developing that and put some resorts there. I am convinced Trump's little love affair with Kim is that he wants to open up resorts in North Korea. In any case, so the problem is he thinks he hates the Europeans. And honestly, I think he hates the Europeans because Europe doesn't like him. And therefore, he wants to pull U.S. troops out of Europe. He wants to pull the U.S. out of NATO. I think it is 100% because, well, 50%. 50% because the Europeans really hate Trump, okay? And he knows it. 50% because Vladimir Putin wants him to pull out of NATO. And again, either Vladimir Putin has co-opted him by offering him a bribe of some kind, and I say bribe, but meaning a hotel or whatever, or he's co-opted him by blackmailing him in some way, which Trump's own director of intelligence thought was happening. But Trump's foreign policy will be he wants to pull us out of Korea, the whole China stuff. He talks a tough game on China because Republicans, here's the thing, Republicans hate China. Now, Republicans never liked Russia, but when Trump came around, suddenly they went, oh, we love Russia. They hated Russia. I mean, I'm not a big fan of Russia personally, but they hated Russia for decades. China, they really hate. And even Trump, I think, with sort of the cult following he has not been able to sort of breach that gap because Republicans so hate China, especially official Republicans, politicians and stuff, that even Trump I don't think is able to break through that, because he talks about Xi. He's a great dictator. He said this week. He's a smart man. They get mad when I say he's a smart man, but he's a smart man. And he wants to suck up to Xi, but his party so hates China that he's going to have a hard time. In any case, his foreign policy it's not just isolationist, which is bad enough. It is siding with America's enemies and frankly, siding with your enemies as Brits or anybody else. He sides with the Russians. He wants to suck up to the Chinese and he sucks up to the North Koreans. I mean, it's kind of a disaster.
I suppose we can just quickly jump over to Ukraine then, because obviously that would mean there'd be a very limited or no support for Ukraine. I'm sure that would mean no NATO membership for Ukraine. What would he do in Ukraine? Because as I just mentioned, he wants to end the wars. It's not as easy as just saying stop the war. How will it end? Will it end? And what effect can it have on Ukraine?
I mean, it's kind of easy. He's just going to cut off all U.S. money. I mean, first of all, he doesn't care if Putin wants the war to end, so Trump wants the war to end. Okay, again, he works for Putin, whatever reason he works for Putin. So sure, Trump wants the war to end because Putin told him to and promised him something in return. But Trump doesn't care if the war ends. Trump literally cares about his pocketbook. He doesn't care. Trump will just cut off all U.S. funding to Ukraine, period. That's it. He may try to broker a deal. We've already heard that they're talking about going back to like this Minsk plan that didn't work several years ago, where it wasn't even implemented, that they're going to like divide the territories in half and somehow not even divide them, but put a demilitarized zone and 2 autonomous regions on both sides. I don't even know what that means. Knowing Donald Trump, it means Ukraine's going to give up the land that Putin already stole. And somehow we're going to stop Putin from invading again. Putin already did this. He invaded in 2014. He invaded again in 2022. And you've got to remember why, once he built up again, and you've got to remember why he invaded. He didn't invade because NATO was expanding. NATO wasn't expanding. Go Google it. I always tell people, just Google is your friend on this stuff. NATO wasn't expanding. And we didn't promise we weren't going to expand. That was the whole thing. Even Gorbachev, the Soviet leader who then became the Russian leader, said, we never promised that we weren't going to expand. By the way, NATO never really expanded. The former Russian hostages came to NATO and said, please protect us from the bad man who's been holding us hostage for 50 years. The former Soviet states, Soviet Union was Russia. It was a dictatorship run by Russia with about 14 other hostage states, including Ukraine, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia. And then you had Eastern Europe. And again, young people may not even know this. The Russians in World War II were allies of Hitler and basically helped start World War II. They promised Hitler, look, we're going to sit back. You go invade Europe. We're not going to touch you. I know your big fear is that Russia's going to get involved and we're going to beat you up, Hitler. We're not. Like, go invade Europe. And even better, let's sign a secret little deal where we get to split up Poland and a bunch of the other European countries and let's have fun. And they did. 2 years later, the Nazis turned around and stabbed the Russians in the back and invaded Russia. So all of a sudden, Russia's now at war, and Russia loves to talk about how they went to war with Hitler. They went to war with Hitler because Hitler betrayed them. They were friends of Hitler. So what do the Russians do after World War II? They take half of Europe hostage. They cut Germany in half and create a communist dictatorship called East Germany. They steal Hungary. They steal Czechoslovakia, which is one country at the time, Romania, Poland, you name it. And they turn these countries into brutal communist dictatorships. Well, in 1989, actually, for Europe, the Eastern European dictatorships explode. Gorbachev is Soviet premier. The Russian economy cannot handle this anymore. It's too expensive. The war with the Cold War with the West, America and the Europeans were outspending the Russians. Our economies are stronger. The Russian economy couldn't do it. Literally, the Soviet Union collapses and falls apart. That happened 2 years later in 1991, but the precursor was 1989 when all of these Soviet satellite dictatorships started exploding and overthrowing their communist dictators and becoming free. I mean, it was amazing to live in that era, to watch this. I mean, I guess chills even talking about it. It was kind of just an amazing thing. This is a very long way of saying the Russians are not thrilled that they lost Eastern Europe because they controlled it. The Russians are not thrilled that they lost the 14 countries they were holding hostage as part of the Soviet Union. Ukraine, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland. They controlled Poland, but Poland was not part of the Soviet Union, but they controlled it as a dictatorship. Putin wants that back. Putin's formative experience was watching that all blow up and go away. He wants it back. They invaded Ukraine because they believe Ukraine is Russia. They already took the Russian territories there, I should say the Ukrainian territories that are there, and claimed they're now Russia. So the only way to stop Putin from coming in again isn't saying Ukraine won't join NATO. He doesn't care if Ukraine joined NATO. He wants Ukraine to absorb it, to wipe the country out and make it part of Russia. And by the way, the other thing is they've even said Ukrainians don't exist. The Russian media and the top guys when the war started said Ukrainians don't exist. They're Russians. And my favorite line was, they just don't understand it yet, and we're going to educate them so they understand they're not really an ethnicity. They're just Russian. So my concern is, that was a long answer, but my concern is that no matter what we do to end this war, certainly on Trump's terms, the Russians are going to build up their army again, and they're going to reinvade in 5 to 8 years because their goal is to take all of Ukraine and absorb it into Russia. So it doesn't matter unless Ukraine joins NATO. Then they can't invade because we all go to war, or we put NATO troops all over Ukraine so that if the Russians invade, they kill us and we go to war. Those are really the only two ways I can think of, that stops Russia from invading again. And Trump doesn't care anyway. Trump just wants to give it to Ukraine anyway.
Well, for those people who maybe don't know about what happened in the 90s, 80s, 70s, they really need to research it. I think it's a really interesting piece of history that affects us, obviously, today. On the complete other side of the spectrum, you've got Kamala Harris, who says that she wants to stand by her allies. She will fight for Ukraine, not literally, but she will stand by Ukraine, give them aid and what they need. Right. I think that's a lot more supportive from a neutral's point of view, where you've got to stand with your allies in times of need.
Yes, the problem with Kamala Harris is we won't fully know what her policies are because she's the sitting vice president. And I mean, I don't know for you guys how it works because you're a parliamentary system, but if you're working for the boss and you're then running to take his job, but in a friendly way where Biden stepped down, you can't disagree with the boss. You can't say, well, he really screwed up the economy. I'm going to do it better, right? You can't say, he's not doing enough I need to do more on Ukraine. You can't. it's inappropriate. It is also bad politics because a lot of people still like, I mean, Biden's unpopular, but not among Democrats. A lot of Democrats still like him. They wouldn't like Kamala Harris criticizing Biden. So it's hard for her she can put out new policies. She can talk about, oh, I've got a new education plan. I've got a new student debt plan. That's okay because it's expanding on Biden's policies, right? But she's even talking about doing more on Medicare, which is our program for health insurance for seniors. That's okay because it's not criticizing Biden. It's saying, oh, let's do something else. On Ukraine, she can't say Biden isn't doing enough. We need to do more, because it'll make Biden look bad. So she has been equally tough on Ukraine. There is some thinking that some of her top advisors on foreign policy are actually more hawkish than Biden's, which is good. I think overall, I think it's good, so that it's possible she would be, again, a little more hawkish, a little more standing up to Putin, et cetera. But she also is very liberal. Now, I think she's shown that she's able to pivot. You know, she has pivoted to be much more of a centrist in many ways over the last 4 years, but she really is very liberal. I mean, I'm on the left. I don't really care. But traditionally, that made you not very willing to stand up to the bad guys, at least in America. Well, you guys too. The left was the ones that were a little more like, don't get involved. We like the Russians. They had communism and it was bad, but it kind of was a nice idea. You know, on the right, they were like, Now the right's the one going, oh, Putin, KGB colonel, we love him, right? So who knows? Because it's unusual that somebody on the left would then be pro standing up to Russia, but that's the situation we're in now. So no, I think overall with foreign policy, we have no idea because she just can't really tell us, other than saying, and she has been very strong talking about Putin and standing up to him, but we won't really know until she gets elected, if she gets elected.
Well, we do know that the campaign has kind of distanced themselves from Biden in the upcoming few days to the election. Let's talk about the favoritism between the two and what supporters' views are, because there's a lot said about Trump, that he lies, that he's possibly ill Project 2025, that he's a liar, a fascist. That I think the list can go on forever. But what do you think sticks out to voters who are undecided, who are Trump supporters? What makes him such a popular candidate to become president?
I mean, okay, that's two different things. Not independents. People who haven't decided, I think, are idiots. And I mean, but every election we have this, where, you know, you're a week before the election and you've got Kamala Harris, who's like totally fine. Again, maybe she's too liberal for you. I can deal with that. But comparing Kamala Harris to Donald Trump, and I mean, I don't have to go through litany, convicted felon 34 times over, sexually assaulted dozens of women, found liable in court for sexually assaulting one of them, tried to violently overthrow the government, screwed up COVID, literally ignored COVID and pretended it wasn't real. You know, we lost, I forgot whether we lost over 1 million Americans to COVID, and a lot of those lives could have been saved. I mean, the list goes on, sucking up to Putin. The list goes on with this guy. I'm going on Trump now. I'm forgetting your question. The independents. The people in the middle, I think, have just got a problem. I don't know what, I mean, there's no explaining them. At this point, how do you not have an opinion on Donald Trump? Either you like him or you don't, but give me a break. I'm not sure. And I'm not sure Donald Trump versus Kamala Harris. But give me a break. The Trump supporters, I have been trying to figure this out for a while. He's a carnival barkster, sort of an old term meaning like the guy at the carnival going, come see the two-headed lady. You know, he's very good. Or the snake oil salesman, where literally these guys would, you know, like 100 years ago or 150 years ago, whatever, because we didn't have that many doctors, would come and sell, you know, home remedies made from snake oil to cure your cancer. And they were con men. But Donald Trump is a very good con man. And I guess part of the answer is what makes people fall for con men, I guess, is that the con man's very good at selling crap to people. Secondly, and this one worries me more, as an American, and I don't know how much of your audience is US versus Europe or whatever, but as an American, we do think of our country as exceptional. Now, less so, but we do think of our country as exceptional. And one of the things I always thought growing up was, and Europeans would always say, oh, American politics, left and right, you're both kind of center right for Europe. You know, you don't have the crazy, not the crazy, but you don't have the socialists, you don't have the communists, you don't have the you know, sort of offshoot of the Nazi party, whatever. You know, you're all kind of center right. And for us, I consider that kind of a virtue, because I was like, yeah, we don't have like a communist party with like 50 people or something. I mean, it's ridiculous. The Communist Party, even the Socialist Party in America, is a joke. There are socialists, but the Socialist Party is just this ridiculous joke of a party. I mean, they're crazy fringe people. And on the far right, well, the Nazis and stuff exist, but they're not a party. But now we've got MAGA. I always thought that the reason our parties were closer together and more in the center was because we just didn't have the history you guys did. You guys have gone through World War II, especially, and other things where fascism took root. And for some reason, again, this was sort of the American thought. There was something in the European conscience that for some reason you guys were more susceptible to fascism than we were, or fascism on the left, communism. I mean, I know fascism isn't communism, but I mean in the sense of authoritarian governments coming in and taking over and being a little violent, right? And you were just more susceptible. Americans wouldn't do that. We don't have that kind of history. And Trump came in and it was like, oh, fascist, cool, let's all vote for him, right? Again, the immorality. I mean, forget everything Trump did. He tried to violently overthrow the government, and they're still voting for him. And the polls have been tightening. In the last 2 weeks, the polls are getting close. She was ahead, but they're getting closer and closer together. Now, she was ahead nationally, and as we said at the beginning of the show, the national vote doesn't matter. It matters in the states. But the idea that in the last few weeks, when Trump has, again, his campaign has gone on more racist rants. They held a rally in New York City, of all things. They held a rally in New York City at Madison Square Garden this weekend. The previous famous rally at Madison Square Garden was the Nazi rally of 1939. And you should Google the pictures. Anybody, especially who's like a New York-ophile, it's freaky. Because it still freaks me out looking at it. It's like one of these movies of the Russians took over America. You're seeing like Nazi flags and stuff in New York City, and these guys dressed in those horrible, German outfits, and you're like, oh my God. They go there, and there's a comedian that opens up, and the comedian goes, hey, did you hear there's a pile of floating garbage in the Atlantic Ocean? And you think he's talking about like that pile of garbage in the Pacific that everyone's garbage, the ocean currents pulled it together and it's like miles wide. It's horrific. And he goes, yeah, there's this pile of floating garbage in the Atlantic Ocean. It's called Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico's literally an American territory. They're American citizens. They're Latino. They were not thrilled about that. He then goes on and starts talking about his black friend. It's Halloween. This is the opening guy for Trump's rally, where Trump's speaking. It's Halloween. I don't know if you guys do it there, right? But, costumes and the whole deal. In America, we carve pumpkins. I don't know if you guys do, but like, And he goes, I've got a black friend. We're going to be carving watermelons. Now, I don't know whether that culturally means anything to you there. Black people eating watermelons is one of the most racist tropes that exists through history. If you Google it, you will see the old stuff from like the 1940s, the 30s, and the 20s, showing like the black people with the super black skin, the white eyes, the big lips, eating a watermelon. It's hard to explain why it is. It's just one of the biggest racist tropes. That's why he said, oh yeah, black people and watermelons. That's why he said they're going to be carving watermelons. It's like, and then the Trump team apparently censored the guy's show. Okay, this is actually worse. They read through the show and they allowed calling Puerto Ricans garbage. They allowed referring to black people eating watermelons, which again, as an American is like, oh my God. They didn't allow, he was going to call Kamala Harris the C word, which in English, in American English, again, it's funny. For you guys, again, not as bad. I know the Australians especially. For us, I can't say I wouldn't say the word even if we were allowed to on this show. It is quite possibly the worst word in the English language in America. I think quite possibly. You do not say it. I mean, even with my friends, I don't say it like you do. You just don't say it because you're afraid someone's going to hear you. They were going to call her that. And the Trump campaign vetoed that and said, okay, don't call her this, C, brunt, and T, right? Don't call her that. But call the Puerto Ricans garbage. I mean, I don't even know what your question was. I'm sorry. I'm on a rant about this stuff, but it drives me a little crazy because he has shown, I think it was talking about the polls tightening. This gets back to, why people support him. I think, and this isn't just an American thing, I think there is a yearning for fascism, possibly innate in human beings. And I don't know whether it's across the board. It might be. I mean, historically, you needed a strong man, and it was a man to run the village or to keep you, right? Because otherwise your society would get attacked and you die. There had to be somebody running the show. And people are more susceptible to it. I thought you could grow out of it historically. And again, Americans never quite had it. So I figured, and Americans, think about this too. Americans fled Europe to get away from fascism. Right? My family came from Greece in 1938 because, and my mom told me, because my grandfather was convinced the Nazis were going to invade Greece and he wanted to get out. And they did, and we got out before. Like, Americans got away from that, and we thought we were immune to it because our politics are so boring and in the middle. And now we see Trump, who is a fascist, and he is, I mean, he's not doing everything the Germans are doing because he can't yet, but he talks like them, and he talks like them. And he's getting away with it because, sadly, there is something, again, in the human psyche that yearns for this strong leader who's a man to hate, to preach hate, and to preach violence, and to strike out against their enemies. And again, the enemy is always somebody within. It's very, I don't get it. I don't know what you think, but I really don't. I almost don't get it. That's been the most shocking thing for me. I'm like, our country supposedly was better than this. I really don't get it.
Yeah, but just lastly, because I know we are really tight on time, for Kamala Harris, again, it's the complete other end of the spectrum, which is, for the first time in a while, we've had two different spectrums. It's just insane. Obviously, with Harris, she wants to promote women's rights. She wants to give reproductive freedoms, which should just be a normal human right to have, in my opinion, anyway. And again, she likes NATO. But what do you think the other end of the spectrum is for Harris? There is a really big difference between the two.
I don't understand your question. What do you mean?
The question is, with Trump, he's favoured because of some of his crazy ideas. With Harris, she's pretty favoured because of the reproductive rights and things like that for women. Right. But what else is she? What else does she promote? What else does she stand for?
Oh God! I mean, the first part is like, I'm not necessarily the biggest Kamala Harris promoter. I mean, it's like, reproductive rights has been the big thing. Especially, actually, what's interesting is, it's been the biggest thing she's talked about because it has been the biggest thing that's influenced the election in the last 2 years. Trump came to power, promised he was going to. All right, quick history lesson here. I don't mind going a little late. 50 years ago, there was a Supreme Court decision called Roe v. Wade, top court in the country, and they ruled that women have a constitutional right to an abortion. That basically, I should be a little more specific. They have a constitutional right to privacy over their body. And, the Constitution guarantees that, and it includes abortion, medical decisions, because it's you have the right to decide what you do with your own body. For 50 years, that stood. It did not mean you could have an abortion whenever you want, or, late term, whatever. It meant then the states had to figure out different trimesters, different rules, this kind of stuff, right? The Republicans vowed for 50 years they were going to kill it. They wanted to abolish all abortion in America, ban it nationwide. Trump comes to power promising he's going to do that. Even talked about throwing women in jail. They asked him, they said, well, if you're going to punish doctors, don't you have to punish women too if they get abortions, if you think it's murder? And Trump goes, yeah. Crazy stuff. So Trump comes to power, appoints 3 Supreme Court justices who pretty much had promised to get rid of abortion. And they did. They overturned Roe v. Wade. Huge. One of the most significant Supreme Court decisions in all of American history. Overturned it. Women no longer have a constitutional right to not just abortion, but privacy and medical decisions overall in America. It's gone. And since that time, 2 years ago, all the special elections we've had, by special elections, I mean, in the last 2 years, we haven't had a presidential election and we haven't had a congressional election. They're every 2 years. So you have state elections, state legislatures, a congressman dies and has to be replaced, a member of parliament, right? And in every election, they're like 22 or something, Democrats did amazingly well and far better than we should have done based on the polls. And what they think happened was abortion changed everything, got women to vote, men too, maybe, not just because they're supporters, but guess what, guys? Guess who gets women pregnant? It's you. If that right goes away, you're going to be 19 years old and dropping out of school and having a baby because Donald Trump wants you to. So the abortion thing became so huge. That's why she's talking about it, honestly. I'm actually not even up on it a lot of her stuff. I should be more, but I'm focusing more, like I'm also doing so much Ukraine. She's been talking about a lot of stuff for seniors as well with Medicare. They want to expand Medicare. It's just one of the big things is home health care, because you don't get that. I went through this with my parents. It's the healthcare program for seniors that's covered by the government, and you pay nothing, or you can pay a little to get even better benefits. A lot of stuff just isn't covered. You need help at home, they just don't cover it. And you've got to literally, we were looking for my mom for help, and people were quoting us $100,000 a year to come and help her. And we were like, who's got $100,000 a year to help your mom? I mean, it's crazy. God, beyond that, I feel bad because I also don't sort of put myself out there as the Kamala Harris defender, so to speak. So I don't have the details. I'm trying to even think. It's terrible because I watch the debates and everything. She's still doing the same student loan stuff Biden's doing. Foreign policy. I mean, it's kind of the same though. A lot of it's Biden stuff. I mean, foreign policy, she's strong on Europe. She's strong on NATO. She's going after Putin a lot. She's going to be strong on China. She has no choice because Americans on both political parties really don't like the Chinese. I mean, meaning the Chinese Communist Party. Like, forget that. I'm kind of forgetting what else though. I should know. Sorry, but as I said, I don't sort of put myself out there as the Kamala Harris supporter, so to speak. It's more just sort of observing what's going on and getting more of the zeitgeist. And let me finish with this because we really didn't say this. We really didn't sort of finish with how's the election going.
I was about to ask who was going to win it in your opinion.
Yeah. Well, because on my show people do that. I'm talking about like the latest in Ukraine and the latest polls and stuff, and they're like, "Yeah, but who's winning?" It is clearly tied. It is clearly tightening, which is very scary. Meaning Harris was ahead by a couple percentage points nationwide, which again doesn't matter in America because you got to win the states. But she was ahead by a couple points, and now it's getting closer, which is insane. In the key states called swing states or battleground states, there's something like 7 of them, more or less. Each one of them controls maybe 3. Like she's ahead in some, he's ahead in others. None of them, maybe one of them, I'm trying to think, maybe one of them, she might be far enough ahead that it matters. They're within the margin of error pretty much. So almost every important state is a tie because there's the margin of error. What worries me is because of the way our system is, this is a good way to end actually, because it's how we started the show. I doubt anybody comes in late to a podcast, but because in America, you have to win state by state and not just win the national vote. The way the state map is laid out benefits Republicans. Experts. A Democrat has to win the presidential election by 1.5 to 2 percentage points in order to actually win the vote in the states, or they lose. If a Democrat wins by 1%, they lose the election. I mean, it's insane, right? And that's the concern now is you've got the election is tied. The fact that the election is tightening is boggling my mind that Trump is starting to do better. Like, again, that's just insane. You've got 2 things going on. One, Trump traditionally does better on election day than he does in the polls. 2016, and I think it was Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, 3 of, again, the key states that everybody needs. Trump did 9 percentage points better on election day than the polls suggested. That's horrific. 2020, same states. Trump did 5 percentage points better. So in other words, the pollsters were able to shift a little, their polls. This time around, when they say it's a tie, is Trump still ahead, or have the pollsters jiggered their models enough that now these polls are real? The good thing for Democrats is, as I said, for the last 2 years, Democrats have won every special election because of abortion, because Trump took away a woman's right to choose in America. It's gone, or certainly the protections. And 20 states have now banned abortion for all intents and purposes, 20 of our 50 states because of what Trump did. And they're trying to make it a crime, by the way, for women to leave state and go somewhere else for an abortion if your state bans it. They want to make it illegal if you leave because you left the state to commit murder. I mean, it's crazy stuff, right? The good side for Democrats is because Democrats have done so well in every election, much better than the polls suggested in the last 2 years, you've now got, is this an election where Democrats will do much better than expected as they have in all the elections of the last 2 years because of abortion? Or is this an election where Trump will do much better than expected as he's done in the last 2 elections? So I don't want to say you can't believe the polls, but there's such a crazy dynamic going on. And you've got the cult status of Trump. He is so hated and he's so loved as a cult leader that which one wins? And the voters in the middle in the end. I do worry about the Kamala Harris thing. People didn't like Biden. Republicans, maybe I want to make this point too, but Republicans lie exceedingly well. Democrats suck at telling the truth. I mean, they tell the truth, but they suck at marketing the truth. And I'm kind of curious if the left in Europe is like this. The left just can't sell, the best chocolate dessert on the planet. They just can't sell it. The right can sell you a pile of shit. You have to worry. There was a wonderful West Wing episode about this where they polled. Did you guys ever? You guys must have watched West Wing there. If you haven't, you better.
I've never watched it.
God. Oh my God. West Wing is one of the best American television shows ever. It's about the presidency, but it's about basically like a liberal president, liberal meaning left-wing president. And it went on for 8 years. One of the best written, and I would say very accurate in a little bit of a Pollyanna sense. It's a little bit of a, if things were nicer, kind of way. Very accurate view of Washington. I kid you not, one of the best shows. But they had a scene where the president's up for re-election and his pollster polls where he should celebrate Thanksgiving, which is a celebration of the day the pilgrim came from England and landed on, Plymouth Rock or whatever in Massachusetts and, sort of established, and we don't talk about killing the natives, but, established America. And we give thanks for surviving the first winter. It's a big family holiday. And the pollster polls, should President Bartlett celebrate Thanksgiving in the White House or or maybe it's at Camp David or back in his home state of Maine or New Hampshire. New Hampshire it is. And the president gets pinned, goes, "You freaking polled where I should have Thanksgiving. It's none of your goddamn business where my family has Thanksgiving." And the pollster goes, "Yeah, you're right. Let me tell you a story." And he's talking about boats and stuff because they both are into boats. They're in New England. And there's some kind of a thing with boat races where there's a guy, at least some boat races, there's a guy whose job is to like literally knock the seaweed and whatever off of the boat as it's going through the water because it can slow you down. And any little bit that can slow you down can cost you the race. It lose you a second. And he goes, "That's what the polling is about. If I can get you one vote based on where you have Thanksgiving, I'm going to do it. I don't care where you have Thanksgiving. The voters care." Anyway, but that's also one of the things that I think a lot of folks on the left don't realize. Like we talk about how the candidate looks and how they talk. Voters care, so we have to care because we've got to win that extra vote. In any case, she's lovely. She's smart. They try to say she's stupid. That's one of my favorites. She's obviously not a very bright woman. She's obviously an incredibly smart woman. I mean, like literally, you watch she's a lawyer. She was a prosecutor. Clearly, the woman's smarter than she, but they're trying to throw whatever they can at her. I think she's a woman. It probably hurts her. We've never had a woman president in America. Keep in mind. You guys had Margaret Thatcher, good or bad, 40 years ago. We've never had a woman president. India freaking had a woman leader. I mean, Argentina, Mexico has a woman leader now. We've never had it here. That's one of the prejudices. 2, she's black. She's Indian too, which people don't love that either, to be honest. But blacks, they really don't like. Barack Obama did win as a black man, so you never know. Maybe we're over that. But I think she's suffering from definitely woman and black. She's suffering from people hated Biden. And the reason I brought up the Democrats not being able to sell anything is I have issues with Biden on Ukraine because I don't think he was strong enough because he was afraid of Putin. But Biden's had an amazing presidency. And right now, the numbers came out this morning, and I hold on, I'm going to, since half an hour, but I told you I wanted to go short. I'm going to pull this up for you because I copied it as long as, well, let's see. It didn't sync from my phone. Let's see if it does. But today in the new economic data came out. Unemployment is at 4.1%, historic low, pretty much full employment. Inflation is at like 2.1% or 2 point something, very low. And if you add in energy and everything else, it's actually 1.5%. The goal is 2% inflation. So inflation is now saved. Unemployment is down. Economic growth grew at 2.3 or 2.8, 2 point something growth, which is exactly what we want. We were able to tame inflation because the whole world had inflation. We were able to tame inflation under Biden, but not crash the economy. It's kind of a complicated economic thing, but basically when you have inflation, you raise interest rates. That's how you get rid of inflation. But what it does is it kills the economy because interest rates, what do? They make things expensive. Maybe you don't buy that car. Maybe you don't buy that home because you go, I'm not buying the home now or even the car because interest rates went crazy. That depresses the economy. It didn't happen. The economy basically is still growing well. Inflation is now back to normal and unemployment is at the lowest level in like history practically. And if you poll people, the majority of the Americans say the economy is doing horribly because Republicans are excellent at selling and Democrats are horrible at selling the truth. And that is going to hurt Kamala Harris because literally we're going into this and people think, oh, that whole Biden-Harris thing was a disaster, but they can't quite tell you why. And then Trump, my favorite is Trump is American presidents love to use the line, or people running for office, are you better off now than you were 4 years ago? Because every 4 years we have presidential elections. Trump is literally doing this. 4 years ago, we were dying. We were locked down under COVID. Trump was ignoring it. Trump was suggesting people inject bleach, okay, 4 years ago. He admitted to the journalist that was interviewing him, Bob Woodward, that he knew COVID was a problem, but he didn't want to scare people, so he just lied about it and said it was going away in 2 weeks. Now we find out he gave Vladimir Putin some of our respirators and other stuff we needed for Americans at the very beginning of COVID when people were dying left and right in New York City. We couldn't buy toilet paper. There was a run on toilet paper. That doesn't happen in America. I couldn't buy bleach. I remember needing bleach for my toilet or whatever the hell it was. We were out of bleach at the store. And I'm like, what do you mean you're out of bleach? It looked like the freaking Soviet. I've been to the Soviet Union, by the way. It looked like the freaking Soviet Union where entire store shelves are empty. And Trump has the nerve because, again, Republicans lie exceedingly well. Trump has the nerve to say, are you better off now than you were 4 years ago? Yeah, 4 years ago, my cousin's husband died of COVID. A friend in New York died of COVID, and I couldn't buy toilet paper. And my investments, because in America, we don't have retirement plans like you guys do. My investments, which is your retirement plan, are now at an all-time high ever. Our stock market's the highest it's ever been. Anybody who's got retirement, that's where it is. I mean, it is insane that people are like, Biden's been a bad president. No, Biden's been an old man. Yes, but he hasn't been a bad president. But he's an old man. He is too old. But it's infuriating to me because it still is this weird conundrum of how do you break through when the other guys are lying? Actually, final point, because I keep saying final point, but political experts will tell you, or campaign experts, if people feel like the economy's bad, you can't tell them it isn't, because then they think, you're out of touch. So it's like, what do you do when we have a historically good economy, but people are like, no, it's not. And you're obviously lying to me and you don't understand, so you can't fix it. And Trump's going to come. Somebody said on Twitter today, they go, Trump's going to win. I mean, he's going to win, but if he wins, like the first day, people are going to go, oh my God, the economy's great. Trump solved it. Because again, the cult, but also the lies. That's a whole other interesting discussion. People are very susceptible to lies. And I think those of us who are more educated and know how to also suss out the lies, like I know how to look online and I see stuff and go, and people go, what do you mean? I go, check out the source on that. And then all of a sudden you're like, yeah, but most people don't. And they just believe the bullshit they're told. Anyway,
well, John, sorry. Thank you. No problem, John. It's been a really great, around a 1 hour show. I really appreciate your time.
No, thank you. No, I don't remember. Are we on video or are we just on audio? I always forget that for you.
We're on video. Okay,
good. Because I did my hair before I came on.
Amazing, John. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jamie.